The NFL draft just 27 days away. We thought right now would be a good time for us to welcome one of the foremost authorities talking everything NFL draft, senior NFL writer for the Draft Network, co-host of the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, and host of the official Carolina Panthers podcast, Cub Scouts. Please welcome Trevor Sikkema to the show. Trevor, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. I mean, somehow you nailed all of the things that I'm doing right now, which I'm impressed with because I can't even keep up with the teams. But I know this has been a long time coming with me getting in on the show, getting to talk some ball with you guys. So I appreciate you being flexible and making the time because I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, speaking of schedule, between now and the draft, what does Trevor Sikkema's calendar look like just at a far glance?
Oh, let me check. Monday, mock draft. Tuesday, mock draft. Wednesday, mock draft. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, we're in the busiest season right now, especially working over at the Draft Network. April is a very fun time. We're going pedal to the metal, if you will, on Locked On NFL Draft, doing all kinds of different projects there with guest interviews, talking to beat reporters, what teams might actually be thinking. We're, of course, hopefully, already wrapping up a lot of our scouting reports on a lot of these players. So, now it's just about finding out what the fit's going to be. What are these teams doing? Saying instead of like, oh, hey, like what kind of players could they target? Now we're going, okay, well, they're probably going to target offensive line. So now who makes sense for the Panthers, for the Chargers, for the Buccaneers, whoever it is. And so month of April is a lot of fun. We get a lot of smoke screens that happen, of course, within the news. I mean, stuff gets out and you don't know what's real and what's not, but that's the exciting part to me, sifting that out and figuring out actually where the truth lies and what might be a smart move and ultimately predicting what could happen at the end of April. So I'm very excited. April's always a good time.
Real quick before we get into the draft questions, I always thought about this. If you guys have not listened to Trevor and Benjamin Solak's weekly dueling mock draft between one another, you need to get on it.
Epic.
You've been living under a rock. It's just a great way to spend an hour of your day to listen to these two trade off between each other. But they're always making it interesting, switching back and forth, odds and evens, of course, proposing trades to one another. I always wonder, Trevor, when you and Ben are done with it, do you ever kind of have a little friendly competition to say who had the better haul between the two armchair GMs of you two?
We do. We have a lot of fun. We try our best to have as much fun as we can while we're recording, because we know that everybody loves just kind of how we approach everything. We have a motto that's called "Don't do the pod before the pod," which like we'll log on to Skype, and that's actually how we record it because we're not in the same room. And so like we'll log on to Skype, and we're honestly for some of these shows just so jazzed about like what's going to happen. Like, for example, when the Niners traded up and the order completely changed, we already started talking about who the Niners could pick and like what it could look like. And then one of us will stop and wait, whoa, don't do the podcast before the podcast. Okay. Wait until we hit record so we can actually get this fun conversation going. But yeah, before and after, there's a lot of a friendly back and forth that happens. I mean, this is what we love to do. This is not just our job, but this is what we do in our free time as well. And so we're football fans just as much as anybody else who listens, hopefully. And so there's always a lot of fun that happens. Sometimes the show will end up be like, oh man, I can't believe I got that guy at this pick, or can't believe we did this trade here and there. That's what makes it so much fun. And hopefully people can tell that we really enjoy what we do in that regard.
Well, let's talk some football. Let's start talking Chargers football here. So outside looking in, Trevor, from your perspective, what does the Chargers roster in terms of overall quality and depth, and how would you grade this team's roster's move over the last two seasons, especially including some of the free agency moves that they just did over these last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll just tell you guys, over the last probably 3 or 4 years, so like back into the Phillips River era, I was big on the Chargers. Like the Chargers were my sleeper Super Bowl team, like my sleeper team to go deep in the playoffs. And like every year I was like, they got me back in. Like, I'm in on the Chargers. Like, they could do it. This is Phillip Rivers year, because I always loved what I felt was the mentality when Phillip Rivers was at the top, because he was so annoyingly competitive. And I think that you absolutely need someone like that at a premium position like quarterback, even with Phillip Rivers' arm. Okay, not exactly what it could be. We saw that last year in Indianapolis, but even these last couple of years with the Chargers, like they could get it done. And they surrounded him with a lot of really nice offensive weapons. I just thought that they were going to break through one of those years, and they didn't. But that's to say, like, the roster was still really solid then. I thought that it had playoff aspirations, deep playoff aspirations, if they really hit momentum and luck right. Now you look at it and it's a little bit different, right? I mean, they got a new quarterback in there. They're clearly doing a little bit more of a rebuild here, but I think that there's still plenty of talent on the roster. Of course, they have a lot of the young guys that they love. On offense and defense, they've got Bosa on one side, they've got Herbert on the other. I mean, you've got your premier pass rusher and you've got your premier passer on offense and defense. So I think that those things are really important. I think that they have good offensive weapons. They could stand to upgrade them. But of course, the big thing that I'm sure you guys have talked about ad nauseum is, what do you do in the trenches? And they've done a lot of work in the trenches in free agency, which I was very proud of them to do, because you often want to go into the draft not pigeonholing yourself, right? We sit here and we go through these mock drafts and we go, okay, well, the Chargers need offensive line and they need offensive tackle, so we're just going to constantly give them an offensive tackle. We do that as an exercise for mock drafts, but if you're really running the team, you don't want that to be the case. You don't want to have to go into pick number 13 and say, well, if we don't get out of this without an offensive tackle, we're screwed. You want to give yourself the ability to, if a player that you really love falls, if a trade comes on the line that you just can't refuse to move back, like, you want to have that flexibility to do so. And I think they did that in free agency by adding Filer and Lindsley and those guys on the interior. And obviously they have Bulaga as well, who they hope is going to play really well on the right side for them. They got Tevy at left tackle. I mean, like, I don't love Sam Tevy, but again, like, he's kind of a guy where it's like, okay, we can get away with it. It gives you still that opportunity to pick best player available. And so when you look at the Chargers roster overall, I think that it's good, but I think the main upgrades they have to make are along the offensive and defensive line still. And anytime that's the case, I still consider you a team that's not quite in your winning window, because in the trenches on both sides of the ball, I think, are so important. So they did really good moves, I think, in free agency, but they still have a little bit to go when it comes to pass rusher outside of Bosa and on the interior. And then with that left tackle spot and maybe another interior offensive line spot, like, all of those things, I still think you have to upgrade them a little bit, but you've got the important cornerstones right there with Herbert and with Bosa and those guys. And so I think that in that regard, I do like the roster. It's just not quite at the next winning window yet, but they're getting there.
Sticking with the offensive line, in your latest dueling mock draft with Ben, you had the Chargers becoming a draft. And I believe this was the same move you made in your last mock draft that you put up at the beginning of March. You had the Chargers trading back to 19 with the Washington football team and taking Christian Darrisaw. Sticking with the offensive line, a lot of people obviously expect Penny Sewell to go off the board at least by 5.
Right.
At least that's where the conversation is.
Right.
And then beyond that, the Rashawn Slater, then the Darrisaw conversation starts coming into play. But just in your opinion, who are, beyond Sewell, who are some of the top offensive tackles that the Chargers should be targeting if it is indeed at 13, or if they end up waiting until 47?
Yeah, I mean, if they have the chance to draft Rashawn Slater, I mean, like, that's a home run for them. So, I mean, like, if they get Slater, they have the ability to play him at left tackle. They have the ability to play him on the interior. I mean, I just think he gives you the most flexibility, and he's one of the best offensive linemen there. I mean, you mentioned Darrisaw. Darrisaw would be a great fit because he's been a left tackle kind of a player. You plug him in at left tackle right away. It's an easy plug and play there. I actually think, I just said that Sam Tevy was with the Chargers, but he was with the Chargers previously, and then he went somewhere else, and I was getting confused there. So they actually have a major hole at left tackle, and so you want to probably get players that have experience there. Like Darrisaw has experience. Slater obviously has experience. Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame has experience, and that's a guy who I think that you could plug in week 1 and just, like, have success right away there. Tevin Jenkins is a good offensive lineman, and he's played left tackle, but it was 3 years ago. He played the last 2 years at right tackle, and he was really great at it. So, I mean, that might just be a great offensive line prospect there. Elijah Vera Tucker's probably the same way. So I'm just throwing out as much names as possible because if Chargers fans out there don't know any of them, I'd love for you to head over to thedraftnetwork.com, look at the draft database that we have, click on some of these names, figure out what these prospects are all about. But at the end of the day, I think the perfect prospects for the Chargers would be between 3 guys. It would be either Rashawn Slater, Elijah Vera Tucker, or Christian Darrisaw. And I think that they have the opportunity to pick one of those guys in the top 20. And it doesn't even have to be a 13. That's why I had them moving back. It was more of a, hey, if the Chargers did this, here's how it could actually still really make sense for them. And I think that there's going to be a chance that they could get one of those players later in the first round. So those would probably be the 3 that I'm targeting heavy if I'm them.
Got it. Now let's talk cornerback, because I've had the challenge of saying quarterback versus corner.
We're all there.
Yes. Cornerback. So everybody knows about J.C. Horn, Elijah Molden, Caleb Farley. All these guys have actually talked with the Chargers. You got Kelvin Joseph, who I've heard you talk about on your show. Half of his body's great, half his body is kind of iffy depending on the day. Asante Samuel Jr., see a lot of people kind of potentially mocking him to us. All of these guys have met with the Chargers, and there's a whole crop of additional ones that could potentially be looked at by the Chargers. So given kind of the new identity the Chargers have with Coach Staley and Ronaldo Hill, who are some of the day one or day two picks that you see actually fitting their needs? Not just who are great corners, but who could actually fit what the Chargers need of versatility at that position.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends which guys they want to go for, because there's a lot of versatility there. If they wanted more of an upgrade at like safety / nickel, I tell you that Elijah Molden's fantastic in that regard. He's a guy that I would probably cover. And I'm also thinking they're probably not going to cover corner in round one. I mean, if they are, then, you know, you get JC Horn, you get Brandon Staley coming over, and it's like, okay, you can almost put him in a Ramsey mold where you're allowed to say, point at somebody on the other team and say, hey, go guard them. Like, I think that JC Horn gives you the ability to do that if he wants to bring that similar role over. Patrick Surtain's another fantastic outside cornerback. I mean, he's so scheme versatile, I believe. I believe he can play in man-to-man. He's fantastic in zone as well. No matter what you're giving this guy, nothing's too much for his plate. I mean, he's obviously the son of Patrick Surtain Sr., played a long time in the NFL, 3-time Pro Bowler, and you can see that in his tape. I mean, he just knows what he is doing so well. He just has a great understanding of playing corner. And I think that's really important too, because almost like I was talking about with Eichenberg a second ago, playing left tackle, how controlled he is, how well he understands the position. That's what gives you the ability to play him in week one, even though he might not have the highest athletic ceiling of offensive tackles. You know what you're getting, and you're okay with playing him in week one. That's the same thing as Patrick Surtain for me. I think that if you go out there and you play him, you can start him week one because it's not going to be overwhelming. You know, scheme diversity, like learning all different kinds of coverages, like all this stuff, it's not going to be new for him. And it's kind of like that for some offensive and defensive players. Sometimes the college game is so different for them than the NFL game is, whether it's what they're executing or what their individual role is. There's just different kinds of schemes that you could get away with and almost work better in college than they do in the NFL. And the NFL is just a different game. You're playing a lot more man-to-man. That's why I'm not worried about Patrick Surtain at all. So that would be a player, if they're looking for a round one guy, that might be the guy that I target if they want to go with corner, because they can go outside and play in that mold. If they wanted to play more of like off coverage, I think like cover 3 stuff, Asante Samuel starts to come into the fold. Depends what they would think of his size, but I really like Asante Samuel. I mean, like, he's a smaller cornerback, but he gives you a lot of upside being able to play zone. He's great when he can keep his eyes on the quarterback, but he's feisty in man. You know, like, he knows what he's doing in man coverage too. Of course, this is another guy who is a son of a former NFL Pro Bowler in Asante Samuel Jr. And so I think that those two guys pop out right away. I like Ifeatu Melifonwu, the tall, athletic cornerback from Syracuse, but I don't think he has the man-to-man skills yet. Like, he can, but if you want to play a lot of man-to-man in year one, he might struggle a little bit for you. So it depends. If you want to have like a year 2 projection for him, year 3 projection for him, that's fine. And especially if you're drafting guys in round 2 or round 3, somewhere on day 2, like that should be your expectation. If they give you something in year 1, that's great. But if not, then probably year 2 is when they're going to come around. Those are a handful of corners that if they had their eye on that position in the early rounds, that's probably where I would go.
Now, the Caleb Farley news that came out with the back issues kind of blew everything up with where everybody was thinking about him going.
Right.
Let's say Chargers are at 13. Caleb Farley's on the board. They go Caleb Farley. What's your first reaction?
13, my first reaction would be, wow, he went higher than I thought. And it has nothing to do with his talent. This is a top 10 player in the class for me. Now, it's a bit of a projection because he's still getting better, but I'm projecting how he is going to be in year 2 and year 3, and I think that he could be a potential Pro Bowl corner. He's tall. He's rangy. He's got the length. He can match up with guys and mirror athletically when it comes to man coverage. He's fantastic when he can keep his eyes on the quarterback in zone. I mean, he has shown flashes of a shutdown CB1 during his time at Virginia Tech, and he hasn't even been playing corner very long. I mean, like, he came to the school as a wide receiver, so he converted over from being a wide receiver. He's still learning the position, and he already showed you so much stuff that you like. I mean, the Miami game is the one that everybody points to, but if you watch that game, you just go, holy cow, like, this guy's unbelievable. He's barely played corner, and he already knows exactly what he's doing. It's the fluidity that he has with his size that does it for me. How he's able to flip his hips, change direction, put his foot in the ground and go. I mean, that's the sign of a guy who can match up with any receiver at the next level. So the back injuries, like you mentioned, that's what makes him worrisome at this point. It's nothing on the tape. Yeah, he's a bit of a project right now. Still, he's got to get a little bit better. Project sounds so harsh, but he has just some development that he needs to make sure that he's a good starting corner and the best of his abilities in the NFL. That is true. But the back injuries are what people are really worrying about the most, because he just had another back surgery right before his pro day. And that is now 2 back surgeries in the last year and a half, I believe. He also has a non-contact ACL injury that he suffered in 2017. And it's like, I love him as a prospect. I do, but you've already had 2 back surgeries and you haven't even played in the NFL yet. That's hard for me because durability is a big deal, especially with first round picks. And so if he goes 13 talent wise, I'm through the roof, because I said this when we went over cornerbacks in our cornerback podcast on Locked On NFL Draft. This guy reminds me, size and athleticism wise, of Jalen Ramsey. So you get Brandon Staley, who's coming over from the Rams. This could be his guy. This could be his, I'm going to take my number 1 corner. I'm going to shut down your number 1 receiver. And that's just what we're going to do. So I'd love it if he was picked at 13, because I hope that he's healthy for a really long, long time. I would just be surprised if it happened at this point.
Got it. Now, another position that I know you have talked about ad nauseum, and actually, as soon as I heard you and Brandon and Benjamin so like talk about this, I was like, thank you. We talk about the edge class all the time and how the top end really isn't there this year. And we heard a lot of people talk about earlier on in the season, we had Kwity Paye, we had just all kinds of guys that people say, oh, there's top 10. We're like, I don't see it.
Right.
Where in the draft do you see edge actually being a value pick? And who are some of the guys that you would like maybe for like day 2 and beyond? Because I think at the first half of the draft, first half of day 1, I just don't see it.
No, first half of day 1, absolutely not. The only edge rusher who I would tell you is a early half of the first round player is Jalen Phillips. And even he has the medical retirement from all his concussions at UCLA. People talk about whether he loves football or not, which I mean, like, I can't even comment on that, because as we've seen, like, that's just ridiculous smoke screens just coming out of somebody's butt at some point. So the concussion things are a real deal, because he medically retired from football before he decided that he wanted to come back, which I feel like would also like just take away a lot of, oh, does he love football? Yeah, he came back from concussion injuries. So I think that his skills are worth an early first round pick. I really do. I think that he could be very impactful in that regard. This is a former number 1 overall recruit in the country, and he puts it on a show every time that he puts on that helmet. So I think that he's probably the only guy that's worth it there. Late first round, there's probably decent value depending on who you can get. Early second round might be the best value, just depending on how the draft goes. Like if people are going to overdraft edge rushers and Jason Owe, Azeez Ojulari, Kwity Paye, like if all of those dudes are off the board by the time the second round starts, then all of a sudden I say to myself, I don't know where the good value is, because Joseph Osai is a projection. He's an awesome athlete, but he's still a projection. Ronnie Perkins, kind of the same way. Joe Tryon, the same way. Carlos Basham is the same way. Like all of these guys, you could go, yeah, I like them. Like there are things about their games that I like, but I don't know if you're getting a steal from any of these guys. I guess I would tell you that the best value is probably coming in the second round, whatever it is. And you hope one of the top guys fall. Like if you get Azeez Ojulari just because he doesn't happen to have the size in the second round, I think that's a really good pick. Same thing with Jason Owe. If you can get him, maybe his lack of production pushes him to the second round. I think that he gives you a high upside. You can pick him there. So it's hard to find good value for this edge rush class just because I feel as though the NFL is going to overvalue the position over the talent pool that we have in this class. There's always teams that want pass rushers. There's always teams that need edge rushers. And so are they going to reach for them? That's the big question. And so it's going to be an interesting class to see how the NFL treats it, because you're totally right. It's not the talent that you would expect at the top, but this is a premium position, so the NFL might still draft it as such.
Trevor, going back to the offensive side of the ball, Chargers lost Hunter Henry in free agency. They signed Jared Cook to kind of fill that void. They got a very young receiving core to build around, of course, with Keenan Allen leading the way. They had Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson fill in admirably as a wide receiver 3 last year. They also drafted Joe Reed and KJ Hill last year in the draft. But the team could still use a little bit more help. And if you're looking for the quote unquote wide receiver 3, I don't think that there's any short of personnel in this draft for that. But who are some receiving threats that you could see fitting well with this team in the mid rounds of the draft?
All right, so mid round. So let me think, like guys who won't be there, because Rondale Moore, I think, is gone in the second round. I think Kadarius Toney's gone in the second round. I think Elijah Moore's gone in the second round. Tylan Wallace is one that pops out immediately to me. I mean, like, he didn't give you a ton of separation with his athleticism, but he's a fantastic contested catch player, even though he is of a smaller size. He would be a great wide receiver 3. I'd say in his eval, I'm going to be higher on Tylan Wallace than other players, than other analysts, just because I think he knows how to play the position so well. He played it at a high level before he tore his ACL, and I think he had a 1,400-yard receiving season as a sophomore at Oklahoma State. Then he tore his ACL, and then he came back, and he still proved to be just as effective because even though he lost a little bit of juice because of the injury, he knows how to set guys up. He understands route running. He is a monster when the ball is in the air, even for such a smaller guy. So, I mean, I said if he's your wide receiver 3, then you got a great wide receiver group. And if you got Williams and you got Keenan Allen and you got Tylan Wallace, I think that that's a really good combination there. Daz Newsome's another one who could be a good slot player. Amari Rodgers could be fun. You know, they drafted KJ Hill, I think, for that sort of mold that Amari Rodgers would be. So it depends what they think of KJ Hill, where it's like, hey, we're going to get the ball into this guy's hands quickly and then see what he can do after the catch. If they want another one of those, if they think Amari Rodgers is an upgrade, I think that that's potential there because you have Williams as an outside guy. You can move Keenan Allen really everywhere if you wanted to play him more in the slot. Then maybe Amari wouldn't be super high on your list because he's pretty much a slot exclusive guy, I think. On the outside, I like Sage Surratt. I really do. He's just never going to separate for you. So, like, if you're okay with him being an X receiver and you just having to live with contested catches, I mean, he's a really nice receiver to have a good mentality to play the X position, knows how to get off press coverage, knows how to play with strength. Same thing with Cornell Powell. I think that he's another guy from Clemson, Amari Rodgers' teammate, where if you wanted an outside guy, you wanted an X, you wanted to have Keenan Allen be more in the middle, more towards the numbers, you could draft a player like this to play on the outside exclusively. So those are a handful of players that I'll say outside of round 2, because I don't want to give you a name that I think is just going round 2, because I think this wide receiver class is really good. Those are some guys that I'm really into on this class that might make sense for the Chargers.
Real quick, Dan, how are we doing on time?
We've got 10 minutes.
Okay, sweet. Just want to make sure.
Trevor, we still have the crappy free Zoom one, so we usually do like 2 Zooms back to back, and if we need to go to the second one.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's fine.
He's probably like, what are you talking about?
That's fine, no worries.
Okay. All right, picking it up. So Chargers are in a really interesting spot in the draft at number 13. And you mentioned this already when you were talking about Rashawn Slater, but there are so many scenarios that could take place before we get to 13. Mm-hmm. But as you said, with Rashawn Slater, who, in your opinion, would be, if we ended the draft day 1, it's all over, and we go back and we start grading everybody's round 1 picks, who would be the realistic home run pick for the Chargers at 13?
Oh, man, what a great question. What a great question. Okay, so I think it would still be Slater. I think just because of the versatility that he gives you, if you have faith that you have a better left tackle than you do an interior offensive lineman, you can play him on the inside if you wanted to. If you think that you have a better interior offensive lineman, which is easier to get, then you have a left tackle, then you could play Slater out at left tackle. And I really think he's the perfect pick for him. Penei Sewell is just not going to make it to them at 13. It's just not going to happen. If they want to trade up and go get Penei Sewell, okay, more power to you. But I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think one of the edge rushers, even Jalen Phillips, would even be a better pick than Rashawn Slater. I'm trying to think of the corners. I mean, I mentioned Patrick Surtain, and I'm trying to picture myself on draft night thinking about what the best case scenario for the Chargers might be. I think really best case scenario is either them staying at 13, taking Rashawn Slater, or them trading back to either 19 or 20 and still getting Christian Darrisaw. Those are the 2 best case scenarios. One obviously has a lot more risk to it because you're dropping back 7 or 8 spots and trying to make sure that a really uniquely athletic left tackle gets to you there. Because if he doesn't get, if you trade back from 13, Darrisaw goes off the board, Slater goes off the board, Vera Tucker goes off the board, then all of a sudden you're like, crap, was this extra draft capital worth it? But those would be the 2 home run scenarios for me. If the Chargers could come away with one of those, either Slater at 13 or Darrisaw at 19 or 20, those are huge wins for me.
You talked about trading back. So if there were suitors to trade back, you said 19 or 20, but which
Yep.
teams would be the suitors for the Chargers to trade back with and why?
Well, I think that it depends on if there's a quarterback that falls, right? I mean, like if Mac Jones is still on the board at 13, they obviously don't need a quarterback. They need to be calling everybody. They need to be calling everybody and either telling the truth or lying their butt off, saying that the Patriots are going to draft Mac Jones. Like the Patriots at 15 are going to pick this guy. So you better come up to 13 to go get him, or the Patriots are going to draft him. And the teams that you target there, of course, the Washington football team at 19, Chicago Bears at number 20. Those are the guys that you're going after, that you're trying to lure in with the quarterback market. I think you could do so with Washington. I don't know if you can with Chicago, simply because I have no idea what the Chicago Bears are doing. Like, I don't know what Ryan Pace is doing. I don't know what Matt Nagy's doing. Like, I don't know what any of these dudes are doing, because they went into a basically do or die season, and they have Andy Dalton at quarterback. And I just I don't get it. Like, I don't know. I don't know, man. It's just very confusing to me exactly what's going on in Chicago. So I don't even know if you can convince Chicago to do that, even though it might be smart. Washington's the big one. I think Washington's the potential target there. Maybe you even can fool the New England Patriots into moving up a couple of spots, just getting, I don't know, a couple of extra pay, like 4th round, 5th round, something like that, just getting that extra draft capital. So you can still go up and get your guy. That's probably the way that I do it. The lowest team that I would tell you would move up to 13 is the Steelers at 20. They're 24, right? They're 24. Yeah, they are 24. That would be the lowest team that I could see you trading back with, because it keeps you still in the first round. You still have a shot at a good offensive tackle if you want one, although it's not going to be Slater or Darisaw. And then the Steelers could move up to potentially go get Mac Jones. But it's not a big, I have to trade up to go get this guy class, And I think that's something that goes into it. A lot of these fan bases, they say, like, for example, we'll do mock drafts, and I'll do that live mock draft series on TDN, and I get a lot of, say, like Vikings fans or Giants fans or whoever, and they're like, trade down, like, let's trade down, like, I don't like anybody here, let's trade down. And I'm like, okay, but there's two sides of the coin. Who are teams coming up to get? And if I cannot identify a player that someone would pay extra draft capital to go get, because you gotta think of it this way. You're not just trading up to go get that player with your first round pick. You are also trading whatever you're giving up to go get that player. So is that player worth it? Is moving from 19 to 13 for 2 extra 3rd round picks? You're then selecting whoever you're getting with not just your first round pick, but also 2 3rd round picks. Like, that's how you have to think about it. And if the guy is right for you, if this is the player that you need to unlock a portion of your offense and defense, really take your team to the next level, yeah, it's worth it. But how many of these players that are still going to be on the board in the middle of the first round are teams going to want to clamor up to go get, other than a quarterback? And I just don't see a lot. So you can say, hey, we got to trade down, but you got to find what the other piece of the puzzle is to make that happen.
Couldn't agree more. I will say, if we trade down, we're going to see Jake Heffer doing backflips all day long on draft day.
Been waiting for it for 20 years, and it still hasn't happened.
Okay, we are wrapping up with Trevor Sikkema from the Draft Network. Trevor, who is a player for you that is flying up Trevor Sikkema's draft board that people need to know about?
All right, I want to make sure that I pick the right guy here, because I want to give Elijah Molden's probably the first one, as I'm like scrolling my big board here. Elijah Molden's a big one. I think I have him as a top 30 player in this class right now. He understands the position so well, whether he's playing
talk to the Chargers too,
whether he's playing nickel corner. I mean, like, this, another son of an NFL vet. Like, he just, you get him in the league. He reminds me, they don't play the same safety position, but he reminds me of Antoine Winfield Jr. and how Antoine Winfield Jr. was able to step in right away for the Buccaneers, play a starting role, be an impact player. Like, that to me is what Elijah Molden could be. I really like Elijah Molden. Dwayne Eskridge is another player that I seem to be a lot higher on than others. He's the wide receiver from Western Michigan. I think he just really knows how to separate. He understands what his speed and what a weapon his speed is, and whether it's a long speed or getting out of cuts, short area quickness. I think that it's all there for him. Now he's still converting to wide receiver, because he hasn't always played wide receiver. He played defensive back early on in his career, even at Western Michigan. So he's still learning and he's still out of control sometimes. Sometimes he's a little bit too athletic for his plan or where he's going. Sometimes he's just running and he figures it out when he gets there. But I really think that if you get a good wide receiver coach with Dwayne Eskridge, he gives you that separation potential with his athleticism and with his control that not a lot of other wide receivers get. So it's a big projection for me to have him as high as I do on my big board and in my wide receiver groups, but I believed in it. He played really well at the Senior Bowl. I think he's got some great tape at Western Michigan where he was the total offense. He's not going to be as dominant as he was with his level of competition, but I'll tell you that he's a guy who gets me excited. And then the other one that I'll mention, actually, I'll mention two more because now I'm thinking of him. Kenny Gainwell, running back from Memphis. Really love him as an outside zone runner. If you get him in his zone system where the offensive line's getting horizontal, where they're going from left to right, where they're moving the pocket or where they're moving the line of scrimmage, he has such a great vision for cutbacks, for where he needs to go, for where space is going to develop, not just where space is now, but where it is going to develop. And I think that he does a really nice job of making sure that he can burst through lines, even if daylight is really small. And then the final guy that I will mention, Tommy Tungiai, the interior defensive lineman from Ohio State. He's not going to be a big-time pass rusher for you, I don't think, but he is going to do his job. He is an early down success story. He is just going to hold the line of scrimmage, whether it's one gap, two, defend the run, whatever it is. He's going to be able to anchor very, very well. I see him being a strong pro. He's not the guy that everybody talks about with Christian Darrisaw because Darrisaw gives you the flashes in the passing game. But as we've seen with so many teams in the past, when you get that anchor in the middle, it makes the difference and it spreads out and has benefits through the edge rushers, through the linebackers, through the defense as a whole. And I think that Tommy Tungiai, he's not going to get picked in the first round like, say, a Vita Vea was in that mold, but he's going to be, I think, a day 2 pick that a team's going to be really happy to get because he's going to be able to anchor the middle of that defense.
So now, Trevor, we always like to end the show with some fun questions. So we're going to get a little personal with you. And we got some rapid fire questions here for you. So I know that you were a little late to the party as far as the Game of Thrones crowd and when you ended up completing it. So tell me this. For Trevor Sikkema, what was the better battle sequence in Game of Thrones? Was it the Battle of the Bastards episode or was it the Long Night?
The long night. I'm remembering the names of them. The Long Night is the Night King battle, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would tell you. Oh man, I think the correct answer here is Battle of the Bastards. I believe. I think the Long Night one matters more, but I'll tell you what was. I was not as disappointed as in the end as everybody else, but I also was coming from a different place. Like if you were watching the show live and you waited 2 years because people waited 2 years for that final season, if you waited 2 years for that ending, yeah, I'd be a little pissed off too. Instead, I watched it very late. I just binge watched all of it in a row and I understood it. Like I was like, okay, I get where they're coming from. Now I've watched like a million fan YouTube videos of how it could have been different. And I'm like, why did these people direct it? Like, this is way better. But so I didn't hate it at the time. But one of the things that I really didn't like about that final season is for 7 seasons leading up, I'll say 6 because we really didn't start to care about the White Walkers and the Night King until probably like season 2, season 3. So like for 6 seasons leading up to season 8, it was Night King's coming. Night King's coming, armies building. They're getting big, they're getting more. Then they get the dragon, and it's like, oh, okay, like now, like everything's happening, and then like it's done within 1 episode. Like it's done. Like they fight them, and it's a great battle scene, and like cool, like everything. It's like it's one of the most intense things in the world. You're just squeezing your chair the whole time, but like then it's just like done. His storyline's over. 1 battle, boom, done. That's it. And I was kind of disappointed in that. I was kind of at the end, I was, taking my deep breath and trying to collect myself. And I was like, I wish he was still there. Like it was, to me, I didn't love the fact that they just ended it after 1 battle really. And I don't even call Hard Home a battle, which I also think is like one of the best episodes in the entire show where they first go against the Night King when they're on the other side of the wall. But I would say that Battle of the Bastards is better because I think the progression of it is great. I think that gives you like, oh, Ramsay's winning. Oh, John's winning. But, oh, like Ramsay's like hasn't even released all of his forces yet. Oh, John's in the middle and he's going to die. Like, this is it for John. This is finally it. And then Sansa's army comes up and it's like, but like everything is such a back and forth and it keeps you on your toes the whole time. I tell you that Battle of the Bastards is my favorite over the Long Night.
We know you're also a big fan of the MCU as well. You have your dog named Marvel.
Yes.
So if Trevor Sikkema had the choice of having the power capabilities of Iron Man, having Tony Stark's suit, or Captain America's super soldier's ability with the shield, what would Trevor Sikkema choose? Or it could be secret door number 3. You may go the Thor route. Who knows? But I'm interested in this answer.
I think the Thor route's not really fair because he's kind of a god. So it's like I feel like that one's not really fair. I think I'd pick Tony. I never thought that I would actually say this, but I've never been asked this question. I think I'd pick Tony simply because Tony can fly. You know, like I'd want to fly. Like everybody asks, like, oh, if you could have one superpower, what would it be? Flight. Like this, like everybody immediately. Like we don't even have to think twice about it. What do you want? Like laser beams to come out of your eyes? No. When are you going to use that? Never. You want to fly. Everybody wants to fly. And so if I get Tony's suit, I get flight and a lot of other cool stuff. So I think I think I'd be picking Tony's suit, even though being Captain America and being able to lap people around and have super fast speed and strength and what feels like invincibility is awesome. But I think I'm picking Tony.
All right. Let's switch over to food for a second. Very two different dynamics here. Sushi or tacos?
So, if you would have asked me at any point before this year in my life, I would have told you tacos, but I've had more sushi probably more than anything else over the last year. So I have to go with sushi.
All right. Trevor Sikkema's music playlist. Who would we be surprised to see on Trevor's iPod?
Anybody who knows me before I moved to North Carolina would be very surprised to see how much Luke Combs I have on my playlist now. But like, I'm kind of into country music now that I moved to Charlotte, which I never thought would be the case. Like, I'm into a lot of different kinds of rap music and even like metal music. I'm super into metal music. Maybe it's metal stuff like August Burns Red or Under Oath or something like Unearthed or something like that.
Oh, Unearthed.
I listen to all of that like before I'm about to work out to get me hyped. But probably the thing that would surprise people the most is the country, the Luke Combs.
All right, very nice. And then finally, it's the weekend because we know how much your career is obviously devoted to the sport of football. Mm-hmm. What would you rather watch? Would it be college in the NCAA or would it be the NFL?
In person or on my couch?
On your couch.
On my couch, I think I would rather watch the NFL, although it's close. If we're talking in person, college, not even remotely close. I went to the University of Florida. I graduated from UF, and being in the swamp for some of those big games that they've played over the years when I was a student and even after when I was a student, it's unlike any atmosphere you'll ever experience anywhere else. If you go to a stadium that holds anywhere from 90 to 100,000 people and it's a rockin' ranked matchup, even at night, at noon, it don't matter. Like, that's an awesome experience. So that would be my answer there.
Trevor, I want to thank you again for coming on the show today. Really, really appreciate your time. Great insight on the NFL draft. Thank you again so much. You can, of course, follow Trevor at Tampa Bay Trey. You can follow all of his content at the draftnetwork.com and, of course, on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Trevor, thank you again so much. This has been a blast.
I know this was a long time coming, so it's fantastic finally to get down to sit down and talk with you guys. So I really do appreciate you having me on.
Thanks so
Absolutely.
much, Trevor.
Thank
awesome.
you, man.